Well, my name is Justin Roff-Mars. I'm the founder of Ballistics. I started Ballistics about 30 years ago in Australia, born in the UK, grew up in Australia, moved to the US about 15 years ago, live in Los Angeles.
So we were just chatting before we were recording about, sort of business cycles. Where do you, your ability to help organizations really sort of re-engineer their sales process? Is it on the uptick that you win? Do you think is it on a downturn, or is it all the time people have this challenge? And you've written the book. Why haven't people just read the book and done it? Why do they still need to ring? Why do they still need to ring you up?
I was talking to someone yesterday, and she said, "Oh, a good friend of mine is a huge disciple of yours. Read the book, and he grew his industrial business and sold it to private equity, and he's rich now. Like, it was a 8-figure or 9-figure exit, and he's rich now." And I looked the guy up. He's on our database, but he's never bothered to say hi. So there's a lot of that actually, which is gratifying. It's nice to see. So there are a lot of people who read the book and simply implement it. In terms of the first question, I think that people think about the work that we do as being within the sales department, and certainly our focus is sales, but most of the work that we do, or a good portion of the work that we do, isn't actually directly on sales. So I would describe the area of the organization we work on as the front of house. Mm-hmm. So the customer facing part of the organization. And we would argue that should include part of operations and sales and a decent chunk of marketing. So most of the work is on the front of house, but the operations part of the front of house, so building or re-engineering customer service teams, building onboarding teams for the onboarding of new accounts. Tech companies call it customer success, I think. Well, I know they do. And design engineering, which is the sort of the pre-sales part of the engineering team. Now, given that we're doing work on the whole front of house, it really doesn't make much of a difference whether it's an upturn or a downturn. If the organization's growing, what tends to happen is the constraint quickly shifts to the operations part of the front of house. And if the organization is not growing, then the constraint shifts to the sales part of the front of house. But most of the organizations we work with are constrained in the front of house somewhere. And on the up cycle, it's in the operations side, customer service, onboarding, and design engineering. And on the downswing, it's on the sales side, marketing and sales.
Well, I was just, as you were speaking, I was thinking about a couple of clients that we've both worked with who've implemented your system. And I suppose they were surprised in the first instance that the first 2 quarters didn't touch sales.
Yeah.
It was fixing. Maybe we should dive in there and go, why?
Yeah. Why?
Maybe are there some philosophies at the core of what you think to be true that people find difficult at first glance?
Yeah. Well, most executives they understand the organization isn't growing as quick as they would like it to. They recognize that sales should be responsible for growth. And if sales isn't working right, there must be a deficiency with sales people. So we better, mess with a comp plan or send them off for sales training or do a ropes course and have them hold hands in the moonlight or whatever the case is. And my argument would be that this part of the organization probably deserves closer scrutiny than that. And then if you look more carefully, what you generally realize is that salespeople aren't winning new business for the organization because they're busy doing other stuff. And what's the other stuff they're doing? Well, the other stuff they're doing is the stuff that we argue should be the responsibility of operations. They're managing accounts, which is just a fancy way of saying rolling up their sleeves and getting involved with transactions that they probably shouldn't be involved with. So, solving problems for customers and doing managing transactions to some extent. For example, managing the onboarding of new accounts. But also salespeople get involved in the technical aspect of sales, which we would move to design engineering. part of the engineering department. So the design of solutions and the generation of proposals and so on. So given that salespeople are typically busy with all that stuff, there's no point trying to make changes in the sales department until you've reallocated all that stuff that's keeping salespeople busy currently.
Well, and certainly we had a client with us this week, and the salesperson that they have who's notionally charged with new business, new business is difficult. And he wasn't earning enough.
Yeah.
So they let him do some account management, because then there would be some transactions that would flow through that would allow them to pay him some more money. And of course, managing transactions for existing clients is much less work than. So when you say they're busy, yes, they are, but it's because it's easier.
Yeah, I was with a client the other day.
Sometimes it's easier for them.
I was with a client the other day, and they allowed, as many organizations do, their salespeople to manage accounts. Now, managing accounts is a misnomer. We're degrading the concept of account management by carelessly allowing salespeople to manage accounts. I mean, I think account management is a valuable concept. If you have Caterpillar or Boeing or Bank of America as an account, and it's likely that you have multiple initiatives running concurrently, and that complexity there needs to be managed. So there's a requirement for that, for sort of a layer of governance that sits on top of the business as usual. And if there's a requirement for that, you absolutely should have someone providing that. And that is what I think we should be calling account management. But what most organizations call account management is basically boils down to performing customer service type tasks. Solving transactional issues, generating simple quotes, processing transactions, arguing with customers about what they're going to pay for a specific transaction, all that crap that salespeople shouldn't be allowed to be involved with. All that stuff needs to be engineered out of. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't even have customer service responsible for it. All that transactional stuff should be automated.
Yep.
Ideally. But it distracts salespeople from selling, and it provides an excuse for them not selling. And there's a danger here. I was with a client the other day. During COVID, the demand for sanitorial and sanitation supplies increased. They're in Jansan. And a couple of their salespeople were earning $1 million plus. Now, it wasn't because they were out there winning new business. It's because they were sitting like brooding hens on a bunch of accounts whose consumption happened to go through the roof on account of COVID. They did nothing special other than process the inbound transactions, and they earned $1 million plus for a couple of years.
There is an argument that you might have changed the comp plan at some point because you might have noticed.
Well,
of course, then the company might say, well, if we did that, they'd leave.
Well,
and I suppose your contention is the customer would still ring and would still order. And why are you paying people commission on this?
I'm not a fan of commissions, as you know, on the best of days. But if you're going to couple commissions to something, presumably it should be the acquisition of new business, not not clipping the ticket on annuity style transactions. I mean, if I were to pay salespeople commission, which I never would, it would be some portion of the net present value of a new account. In other words, I would look at that account and say, I think the lifetime value of this account is $1 million, and I'm going to give you a percentage of that. And then you're going to hand the account over to operations, and you're never going to have anything to do with it moving forward until it makes sense to go and sell some new category of business to that account.
Yes.
And that would incentivize growth to the extent that commissions do actually incentivize anything, which is not much.
Well, I think the evidence is if it is actually transactional, I can find evidence that if people are on piece rate, putting widgets in a box, doing a thing, knocking 100 doors a day, paying people piece rate, you can drive up some volume.
Yeah, if it's mindless work. That was the finding of there's some academic studies that have been done, and the findings are that mindless work, digging ditches, and I would agree that there are elements of sales that are mindless, like knocking on doors. If you pay someone on a piece rate, you're probably going to increase their rate of work. But if they're doing knowledge work, if they're sitting solving problems, designing a new airplane, for example. I mean, if you went to Elon and suggested to him that maybe the engineers at SpaceX would work better if you paid them on a piece rate, he'd throw you out of there in 10 seconds. The idea would be idiotic on the face of it.
Well, or if support techs got paid per ticket, or developers got paid. I mean, I often pose the question to clients. I say, look, if you paid well, they'd write shorter lines, wouldn't they? I mean, they just would, right? They would. And if you paid support, or at a call center, when as soon as they say how many calls you make, they hang up on customers, or they just pick up the phone and put it down again so that their call stats look better. Yeah. People's behavior changes to match the compensation.
I think sales managers are lucky that piece rate pay doesn't directly drive behaviors, because if it did, you'd end up with even worse mischief going on in sales departments than you have currently.
Yes. And you get plenty of that. I mean, Wells Fargo got into a whole heap of trouble opening accounts for people that didn't want them. Yeah. Because that was how people measured success.
I mean, I started sales in the insurance industry, and it didn't take salespeople long to figure out that they could convince people to buy, insurance policies that they didn't intend to keep. And then, so a salesperson could join the organization, sell all their family and friends, leave with their big fat commission check, and then have their family and friends cancel. And then when the insurance company came and did the clawback, as we used to call it, the company would end up holding the can. We'd hire new salespeople. It took new salespeople like a matter of weeks to figure that out.
So if you don't pay people commission, what do you pay them?
Their market value.
Okay. Just
like everyone else in the organization. So rumor has it that Google has a artificial intelligence engineer who they pay $5 million a year.
Aha.
I saw yesterday. I've never met a salesperson who earns $5 million a year. And the reason they pay him $5 million a year is because that's what they had to pay him to convince him to go and work at Google.
Well, I was reading an article yesterday where graduates who have a degree which is specific to AI were getting $400,000.
Yeah.
Straight out of uni.
Yep. The market sets. I mean, I think every business owner or entrepreneur, wannabe entrepreneur, should have to repeat to themselves 10 times a day as they're shaving or whatever. The market sets prices, we don't. And that applies to how you compensate employees. It also applies to the products and services you sell. There's so much nonsense that goes on in organizations based upon this sort of careless idea that we get to determine the price at which something needs to be sold. People talk about, well, we're calculating the price. No, you're not. You're playing with numbers. You're not calculating anything. The market calculates prices.
You've got
for both employees, and what you're doing is determining whether or not you're prepared to do a transaction at the market price.
Yeah, there's that sort of willingness to pay. There's a book called "Someone Will Be the Most Expensive. It May as Well Be You," and the subtitle is you then need to work out how you create the value to make that true.
Yeah,
and it's true for both when you're selling to customers and when you're attracting and retaining employees.
Yeah,
you've got to have a value. You've got to have a value proposition.
Yeah, what's the top decile of what the market is paying for this particular product or service, and then figure out how do we have to engineer and deliver our product or service such that we can price it in the top decile.
Yeah, well, and we always do a bit of work with clients on their valuation when they come on board, and we were doing some work recently with a client, and a 1% price increase was worth. They're not a huge company, but 1% price increase was worth $1 million of valuation to them. £1 million of valuation. And so that was a number that they didn't realize. And quite often I think clients can charge more than they are charging. Yeah. Actually, often as a small business, it's in your head, a sense of
The next question you ask is if you think there's enough elasticity to get away with a 1% price increase, which presumably you and the client both did, is how would we have to change the product or service so that we could get away with a 5% or a 10% or a 20% price increase?
Totally.
I mean, the core problem that we rub up against is not really a problem with sales. I mean, we fix problems that are structural problems. Re-architecting the organization. But all we do is shift the constraint to the core product. In other words, what we end up bumping up against is the organization doesn't have a truly compelling proposition. Mm-hmm. When you put the proposition in a kettle and boil all the fat out of it, it looks just like everyone else's. And there's not enough, and I think a lot of executives are scared of it, there's not enough of the gray matter in the organization dedicated on a day-to-day basis to the kind of innovation that's required to cause the product to be materially different or the service to be materially different. And there's two ways to be materially different. One way is to be the biggest player so that you have a sustainable cost advantage and be cheaper and faster. The other way is for the product to be different in the more conventional sense, like Uber versus a traditional taxi cab.
Yeah.
Or Amazon Web Services versus self-hosting the server in your bedroom.
You've either got to be the cheapest or you've got to be different.
Yeah.
And I mean, that price doesn't necessarily mean you are actually the cheapest in the market, because somebody like Mars have a lowest cost. They have a lower cost of production for their bars of chocolate than Nestle do.
Yeah.
Which allows them to buy the best shelf space in every store that they're in. And
so they can price.
And therefore, they get advantage from that.
Yeah, so they earn higher margins at a lower sell price. Yeah, I mean that's the ideal, right? To have better margins. I'm a big fan of moving to subscription services, and we worked on a few occasions with a company in Australia called Programmed. They used to be called Program Maintenance Services, but when they floated, it wasn't a great acronym, PMS. But what they did is they sold painting as a service. So they approached, property managers. So if you were Westfields and you had lots of shopping centers or similar, they would approach you and they would say, look, we'll take over the painting. What we're really going to take responsibility for is keeping your buildings looking nice. And we'll keep your buildings looking nice for X number of dollars per month. And you sign a 5-year contract and you'll have nice looking buildings for the next 5 years. But the reason I'm saying buildings looking nice rather than painting buildings is their core service was painting, and they had Australia's largest painting crew. But they also had one of Australia's largest commercial cleaning crews, because what they knew is that you didn't just have to paint buildings to keep them looking nice, you could power wash them as well. Mm-hmm. And by having their own internal salaried painters and cleaners, when they signed these contracts with clients, it enabled them to move demand around. Mm-hmm. So what normally happens is everyone wants their buildings painted all at once. But if they move them to a subscription service, during busy periods when everyone wanted their buildings painted, they were out there pressure washing buildings, maintaining the paint job until they could paint them during a quiet period. So they had the biggest force of painters, but their painters were consistently busy. So on average, they were earning a higher utilization on their painting crew than competitors did. And that meant that their margins, not only were their prices surprisingly low, but their margins were significantly higher than a typical commercial painter.
Yeah. Well, I was with a client recently that they sell digital SaaS software to manage service providers, but they're not the cheapest. And so so when you say, oh, they were painters, but they're not selling painting, that was absolutely true at PAX 8. You could buy that software cheaper from somebody else, and therefore that wasn't the value. The value is they have a platform, they have a marketplace, and so you can integrate the software acquisition with your management tools that you manage the end client's IT with. And so it takes out all that the value's in all of the integration and the shag factor that it removes, and that it balances up every month. Whereas if you previously bought it from lots of different people, there was a whole load of manual activity that you had to do.
Well,
So
it's
it's
interesting.
just
Software people talk
companies
about
often,
building a platform, but and I guess Silicon Valley introduced this idea of platform or platform companies into the vernacular, but it's been around for a long time. And of course, Programmed in Australia is a platform. And if you look at them today, they don't just have painting and cleaning; they have plumbing and a whole bunch of other industrial services. So I don't know whether they realized it or not, but by doing what they did years and years ago with painting as a service, they actually built a platform that they've been able to bolt a bunch of other things onto. Because once you have a bunch of clients on a monthly retainer plan and they have an additional requirement, all you have to say is, hey, well, why don't we just up your monthly fee? If you have some, buildings that need maintenance, especially if there's a big upfront capital expenditure required, you have the opportunity to say to them, look, we'll cover the upfront capex if you sign a 5-year contract for the ongoing service. And it's a very compelling proposition.
At Rackspace, Pier 1, that was our model.
Yeah.
You want some hosting, we'll buy all that server infrastructure, monthly fee, we'll manage it all.
Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can do it with websites. Rather than paying upfront to have a website built, we'll just sign you to a hosting contract.
Yep. Well, and now Rolls-Royce do it. You don't buy an engine.
Yep.
You pay
You lease
for
it.
hours in the air, and it includes the maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In aircraft, people think like that. What a lot of people don't realize is that the airplane that you fly on contains a whole bunch of secondhand parts. And it's because the parts aren't sold. The parts are sold by the hour. So you buy a fan for a jet, and you pay X for it because it has, 1,000 hours of life left in it. So nobody cares whether it's new or not. All they care about is how many hours worth of life am I buying when I buy this fan.
Yep. And I think of that whole creating the value proposition as product marketing. And I find it certainly in B2B companies to be often absent.
Yeah.
And I think probably because the clients I'm working with started a company and had some sort of niche. They knew what they were doing. And therefore they get to a certain scale point, and then they've now got to the point where maybe they're not as nimble as they were. Maybe they're not as hungry. Maybe they're no longer as cheap. And so they start to look very much like everybody else.
And you have a legacy customer base and you're concerned about disrupting them. I don't know whether it's cause or effect, but straight away, I think the problem is this term product marketing. The moment you relegate the responsibility for product to marketing, you no longer have an interest in product. And that's not to demean marketing folks, although some of them deserve to be taken down a peg or two. It's because marketing folks don't have a mandate to make the kind of decisions that you need to make in order to have a materially better product. Like, if you worked in the taxi industry and you went to your bosses and said, I got a great idea, let's, transform ourselves, let's adopt all of the key elements of Uber. Well, now it would make sense in retrospect, but nobody would have said yes to that in advance.
Yeah.
Or another example would be vendor managed inventory, which has transformed industrial distribution here in the US and probably the UK and Australia as well, lesser Australia. But nobody would have said yes. No executive would have said yes to a marketing person who proposed vendor managed inventory. Look, we're going to give all our stuff to customers on a consignment basis, and we'll just bill them for it as they sell it. That sounds like an insane idea, but it's been transformational for big industrial supply houses here. So even if marketing folks had ideas like this, ideas that are clever enough to move the needle, they don't have a mandate to execute on them. These ideas have to come from the top of the organization.
These are strategic choices
that
businesses have to make. And certainly the turnaround of Best Buy is a great example where they said, well, how do we compete with Amazon? Oh, well, actually, if you get in your car and drive here, you can have it quicker than Amazon. And We'll Apple and Samsung and Microsoft will pay us to have a store within a store.
Yep.
And pay us per square foot. Plus, they'll pay us the wages of some staff who are experts in their products, and transform the shopping experience.
Yeah.
So it's I think these things are strategic. You've got to. I'm always surprised how little. Well, in some ways, the executive team in an organization often doesn't spend a lot of time talking to its own customers. Some of them do, but some of them don't. Often the marketing.
There's an interesting tell. Just to beat up on marketing people a little bit more. Marketing people actually admit, without admitting it, which is why I call it a tell, that they're not responsible for product. And the way that they admit it is they don't talk about products. They've done this bait and switch. They talk about brands. They say, oh, we're building a brand. Or they use brand as a synonym for product or even for company. They say, oh, I'm managing a portfolio of brands. And what they have done or tried to do is to abstract they've tried to fabricate an abstraction. They've tried to argue that the marketing persona, if you like, of a product is somehow different from the physical attributes of the product. Which is strange because we have a word for goodwill, right? It's goodwill. If you have a product that has a good reputation, it has goodwill, and accountants have recognized that for years. We don't need this word brand, but it's a fabrication that's been created by marketing people for the benefit of marketing people. But they do get great benefit from it. They convince folks to give them money to work on the brand, whatever the fuck that means. But the interesting thing is it's also an admission that they don't have responsibility for product. Because if they did, they wouldn't talk about brands all day. They talk about building better products.
In fact, I was watching, somebody was showing me a video the other day of Elon Musk on TV in the US being interviewed. And he said, people should just spend less time on PowerPoint, less time in meetings and spend more time building better fucking products.
I have never once heard Elon use the word brand. And you mentioning his name just reminded me of that. Never once heard him use that word. And I'm pretty sure if you use that word in front of him to refer to SpaceX or Tesla, he would be insulted by it.
It's interesting, though. In a sense, I think with Tesla, with the Roadster, they created a brand. They created something that had some pull, which then allowed them to create a mass market.
I'm not arguing they don't exist. They do exist, but the brand is a consequence of a great product.
Yes,
it's not something that it's an emergent effect. It's not something that you get to engineer directly.
Yes, it's like trying to create a brand around a sports team that never wins a game.
Yeah, or it's like a thief saying, "Oh, I need to fabricate a good reputation for myself so that I can pitch stuff for more folks." Well, unfortunately, the only way to have a better reputation is to stop being a thief, right?
Okay.
Your reputation is an emergent consequence of your actions on a day-to-day basis.
So who else should we beat up on? Who's next? What are the functions?
Well, I don't want to beat up on engineering because they're my friends. They're the only ones who like me.
Is that? Do you think that's a consequence of engineering-led, and either in the physical sense or in the IT sense, engineering-led businesses where people have a low regard for salespeople from birth, and therefore, one of the things that people often say about your book is, oh, this is brilliant. This helps me come up with a way to manage salespeople that hadn't occurred to me before, and manage salespeople much more like I manage the rest of the business or manage the engineering team, and so make it less about this art of sales and have more structure and science to it. And certainly not paying them commission helps people in engineering feel better about sales.
Yeah, I think if I was to pick on engineers make a mistake that's the inverse of the mistake that marketing people make. Engineers fall in love with the attributes of the product and ignore the marketplace altogether. So they build what in their mind is a beautiful, elegant thing, and then they will try and bludgeon the marketplace into falling in love with it. So you need the marketing folks to be the voice of the customer, to keep engineering on the right track, because otherwise the engineering function becomes entirely self-referential, and it builds some beautiful thing that nobody wants. The Betamax or the Dvorak keyboard, which is technically better, arguably, but nobody actually wants it. So these are the products of engineering. And I mean, Elon's brilliance, and not just Elon, probably anyone who's who's built $1 billion business from product innovation, that these folks have the ability to have simultaneously a deep understanding of product, ability to reason from first principles where product design is concerned. Jobs would be the classic example, and also have just an intuitive understanding of the marketplace, like a profound understanding of what moves customers.